when caution quietly becomes constraint. Caution feels responsible. Restraint feels intelligent, until they begin closing doors no one remembers opening. This matters now because modern financial systems prize caution more than ever. Risk is minimized. Exposure is managed. Volatility is smoothed. These instincts are not wrong, but when caution persists without reassessment, it begins shaping outcomes in unintended ways. The system designed to avoid harm starts avoiding progress. The posture adopted to protect against loss begins protecting against gain. And because this transition happens gradually, without any single decision that could be identified as a turning point, it passes almost entirely unnoticed until the cost has grown too large to ignore. To understand how caution turns into constraint, we need to look at repetition. What starts as temporary restraint becomes habitual. What is avoided once is avoided again. Over time, entire systems adapt around what feels safe. Possibility narrows, not through prohibition, but through neglect. The paths that are never taken become overgrown. The questions that are never asked become unthinkable. And the options that were never exercised quietly expire, leaving behind a system that mistakes the boundaries it built for itself as the natural limits of what is possible. London has seen this transition many times. After crises, caution is essential. It restores trust. It rebuilds stability. But when caution remains long after danger is past, it changes character. It stops protecting the system and starts limiting it. Risk aversion hardens into structure. Flexibility erodes quietly. What was once an emergency response becomes a permanent stance, and the system that adopted it for protection begins to be defined by it in ways that were never intended. At first, this feels like discipline. Decisions slow, margins widen, errors decrease. But something else happens beneath the surface. Innovation thins, opportunity concentrates. New paths are not rejected. They are simply never explored. The system grows orderly, but less curious, safe but less adaptive. The discipline that was meant to protect the system's capacity to function begins subtly undermining its capacity to grow. This is a first reveal. Caution does not need to be extreme to become limiting. It only needs to persist unquestioned. And when caution becomes a default, the future begins shrinking without anyone noticing. Once caution settles in, it begins rewriting behavior subtly. Participants stop asking what could work and start asking what might go wrong. Decisions are filtered through avoidance rather than possibility. Processes evolve to prevent error instead of enable progress. Over time, the system becomes highly skilled at saying no, even when yes would be justified. London understands how quietly this shift takes place. Caution spreads through incentives, not mandates. Risk committees gain influence. Approval chains lengthen. Uncertainty is treated as something to eliminate rather than navigate. Each layer feels reasonable. Each safeguard feels responsible. But together, they reshape the system's posture toward the future. The system that once leaned forward into possibility now leans backward away from risk. And the difference between those two postures, compounded over years, becomes enormous. This creates a narrowing effect. Projects that require patience struggle to begin. Ideas that challenge precedent are delayed indefinitely. Capital flows toward what already exists. The system becomes excellent at preservation. It protects what has been built. It maintains stability, but it slowly forgets how to expand. Growth becomes incremental. Innovation becomes cosmetic. The environment rewards those who fit, not those who explore. Those who fit grow more confident. Those who explore grow less welcome. And over time, the system self-selects toward a kind of participant who has stopped expecting more than cautious continuation. Caution, once a response to danger, becomes a culture. And cultures are difficult to reverse. London has seen how this culture reinforces itself. Success achieved through restraint is credited to caution itself. Failures are blamed on deviation. The lesson taught is clear. Safety comes from staying inside known boundaries. But boundaries that are never tested begin to close. And when caution becomes identity rather than strategy, constraint follows naturally, not because anyone chose it, but because no one questioned it in time. The conflict emerges when caution starts resisting necessity. As the world changes, the system struggles to respond. New conditions demand movement, but habits demand restraint. Opportunities appear that require commitment. Yet the structure hesitates. What once prevented mistakes now prevents adaptation. London recognizes this moment immediately. It is when caution no longer feels protective, but obstructive. Decisions that should be evaluated on merit are filtered out early. Risk is avoided even when it is required. The system begins optimizing for error avoidance rather than relevance. This creates internal tension. Participants feel pressure to innovate, but lack permission. Markets signal opportunity, but capital hesitates. The environment evolves, but structure remains static. Caution hardens into inertia. Those operating inside the system grow frustrated. Those outside begin moving faster. The gap widens quietly. Success shifts elsewhere while stability remains at home. The system is still intact, but it is slowly losing its ability to lead. London understands that this is not a crisis of intelligence. It is a crisis of posture. When restraint dominates too long, courage atrophies. Decision-making becomes defensive. Change feels dangerous not because it is wrong, but because it disrupts comfort. And comfort, once institutionalized, is difficult to challenge. This is a critical conflict. Caution that once ensured survival now threatens relevance. And relevance, once lost, is far harder to regain than safety ever was. The climax arrives when caution finally reveals its cost. A moment comes when restraint can no longer protect what was meant to preserve. Growth fades. Influence weakens. The system remains stable, but increasingly sidelined. What once felt safe now feels limiting, and the price of inaction becomes visible. London understands this reckoning well. Resolution does not come from abandoning caution. It comes from rebalancing it. Boundaries are revisited. Risk is reintroduced deliberately. Decision-making shifts from avoidance back toward judgment. The system relearns how to move without abandoning discipline. This is a resolution of constraint born from caution. Safety remains important, but it no longer dominates every choice. The environment regains flexibility. Innovation re-enters gradually. Opportunity expands without recklessness. The system evolves, not by rejecting its past, but by releasing what no longer serves it. The lesson is clear. Caution is essential in moments of danger, but it must not become a permanent stance, because systems that protect themselves too well eventually protect themselves from the future. And once that happens, stability becomes isolation rather than strength. London's enduring advantage has been knowing when caution has done its job, and when it is time to let it loosen its grip, because survival is not the same as progress. And only systems that understand the difference remain relevant. Subscribe to join the journey. The deepest cost of institutionalized caution is what it does to the imagination of those inside the system. When restraint is consistently rewarded and deviation is consistently penalized, the range of what participants consider worth attempting contracts quietly but substantially. People stop proposing ideas that they expect will be filtered out. They stop identifying opportunities that would require the kind of commitment the system has signaled it cannot make. They adjust their ambitions downward to match the appetite of the institution around them, and in doing so, deprive both themselves and the institution of what might have been its best contributions. This dynamic is especially difficult to reverse because it is invisible at the individual level. No one announces that they have stopped thinking ambitiously. The adjustment happens inside each person privately, as a rational response to a set of incentives that have been quietly teaching them what kind of thinking is welcome. By the time leadership recognizes that something has been lost, that the pipeline of genuinely new ideas is thinned, that the institution's response to change has become slower and more defensive, the cultural shift has been years in the making and cannot be corrected by a single speech or a single strategic initiative. London has learned this through experience. The most difficult recoveries from constraint are not the financial ones. The capital can be raised, the positions can be rebuilt. The most difficult recovery is a human one. Convincing capable people, who learned under a cautious culture that boldness was not rewarded, to believe that something has genuinely changed. It takes time. It takes demonstrated tolerance for risk and sustained permission to fail. It requires the institution to earn back what caution quietly cost it. And it requires a humility to acknowledge that the culture of restraint, however well-intentioned, eventually became its own kind of problem, one that required exactly the kind of courage the institution had been steadily discouraging. When